Hello, my name is Marcus Ruiz Evans, president of Yes California, founder of the CalExit idea in 2012, maybe 2011, with another report on the continuing saga of the breakup of America, something we're not advocating for, but something that we have been not afraid to cover for the better part of a decade. Here's the new update. Kim Iverson, a serious reporter at the Hill Rising TV show on YouTube, said this very recently. I've never had this question posed to me about a second civil war more than in the last few months. She's a serious reporter at a news source that covers DC politics. And what she's saying is that people are talking about national divorce and civil war more than she's ever seen in her professional career. That should say something. The episode was called Kim Iverson is a Civil War Looming. Americans support red states, blue states seceding from the U.S. on October 18th, 2021. Iverson and the rest of the analysts at the Hill did something historic. They actually laid out a serious scenario for how a plausible second civil war would happen. We're going to cover that and talk about how plausible it is and relate it to current events. No one does this. People talk about a national divorce and the possibility, but nobody has war-gamed out how a second civil war would actually happen and had the reputation to do it and did it in a serious manner. We at Yes California are going to do something the media won't do. We're going to compare this 2021 scenario by political analysts against the fictional movie made in the year 1997, almost 24 years ago or a quarter century ago. Almost a quarter century ago. So that film in 1997 was called The Second Civil War. It starred Beau Bridges, Dennis Leary, James Earl Jones, Phil Hartman, and of course, the excelente Elizabeth Pena. I grew up watching Elizabeth Pena on TV. She was the only Latina we were allowed to see on television, just like Danny Trejo was the only Latin man we were allowed to see on TV. Great movie with great actors. It was certainly awesome to see Dennis Leary, and James Earl Jones is so talented. Phil Hartman, of course, excellent performances in Beau Bridges. I encourage everyone to see it. Simply type in The Second Civil War, 1997. Now, they build that movie as a comedy, but it's anything but. It's not funny at all. It's very dry. It's kind of dull. It's supposed to be funny. And the movie ends with American soldiers turning on American soldiers and murdering them in cold blood. That's not funny at all, even for a dark comedy. Let's start with an analysis of how the Second Civil War would go, provided from what Iverson said. Now, this is the 2021 look. What did the political analysts at a top political show say in 2021 as how they thought a second civil war in America would go? Let's take a look. So first they said it would not be a hard weapon war. There wouldn't be big guns and cannons shooting each other. They said it would start off with a state choosing to ignore federal law. The federal government would then use embargoes around that state to cut off access and goods to them. That state would be offended by that and deploy soldiers to their borders to protect their state. That upping the ante would result in the federal government from sending troops to that state and increasing the tension. Some states, Iverson says, could hold out from the embargo from the rest of America, but most states couldn't, and it would just end very quickly. So they say we're going to resist federal law. They're very serious. The federal government may ignore it, but at some point they have to do something. So they simply embargo that state and cut off access and funds. And that state shrinks because most states require trade in goods from the other states. They're landlocked and they're small enough. They don't have enough currency on their own to run their own affairs. States would resist federal law, they said, but they would not form militaries to fight against one another. Although this is less violent, they said it would still lead to the dissolved American states. Quotes from Iverson, likely to be less dramatic, but just as damaging. She said it would be like how Venezuela or Iran, or I would offer India, a central government, launched out against secession movements in their countries in the last 5 years. Now, what they did was Venezuela, Iran, or India had a single state who was trying to secede, not a whole region. And they simply used the military to isolate that area and cut it off from communication and trade and access and goods, and essentially starved them out into submission. So they're saying that's what would happen here in America. Now, Ryan Grimm is another analyst on the show. He said the fight would come between California or New York to get to the federal government. He specifically zeroed it in from a general concept of states to specifically just two, CA, New York, and that they would be forced to fight the federal government. His scenario for that was this. The Republicans would come to control the Senate and the House, and they would start to unwind what California has done on education or perhaps another policy. And the Republicans would use their federal power, which they got with only a minority of the country voting, to do what they could do, to destroy California law. Some Californians or New Yorkers, Grimm concluded, would want to secede. Others would say nullify the orders. He also predicted no violence and a mostly state federal legal conflict. What's interesting about what Ryan Grimm says about the reasons for California to secede from America is they match what other people said. So Nate Silver of 538, one of the top political analysts in America, said, quotes, "What if California were to say they were being tired of run by a minoritarian Republican Party?" He said that right after Biden won the election, when he thought that maybe Trump wasn't going to go away. That was a year ago. Trump isn't going away. It was in an article called "Partisans Don't Just Disagree, They Hate One Another" on 538 Podcasts. Another person who said that was Joe Matthews. Joe Matthews has been covering California government for about 3 decades. He's exceptionally well informed, knows California government, knows the laws, knows federal law, and has reported on it in a serious manner for a very long time. He's also known as Mr. California. Now, in 2021 May, Joe Matthews said, a well-respected reporter on California government said that because the Supreme Court is conservative and appears to have a hatred for California, quotes, "As for the current justices, here's a warning. If you persist in open bias against our state, don't be surprised if citizens defy your rulings." And finally, we'll go to Professor Jonathan Taplin of the University of California Annenberg School of Communication. He's a dean at the School of Communication at the University of Southern California. About a year ago, he said this, quotes, "It's a good thing California's finances are in good shape because we can expect no help or guidance from the federal government, even if a progressive wins the White House. As Norman Ornstein of the American Enterprise Institute has pointed out, by 2040 or so, 70% of Americans will live in 15 states, meaning 30% will choose 70 senators, and the 30% will be older, whiter, more rural, more male than the 70%. In other words, the Senate could well be controlled by a conservative minority for years to come, one that would be resistant to providing any progress to states like California." Jonathan Taplin, a professor at USC, Joe Matthews, a reporter in California, Nate Silver, an American political expert, and Ryan Grimm, an American political expert, all said the exact same thing. The Republican Party represents a minority of America, and their views, whether you like them or not, are the opposite of what a majority of Californians want. How long will Californians tolerate what they view as a not popular elected body representing a minority of Americans but seizing power of the government, and tolerate them trashing everything California says is valuable? 2 Americans and 2 Californians said that California would not tolerate that and would secede or nullify the orders. That would automatically create the mechanisms that we saw in the 2021 scenario by Iverson and others as how a civil war would happen. The most likely culprit, therefore, is California to start the second Civil War. Now let's compare the 2021 scenario to the 1997 movie, The Second Civil War, again, made almost a quarter century earlier. One scenario recently, another scenario 25 years ago, basically in the past. How close or differentiated are they? Let's cover that now. A liberal American president wants to have Muslim refugees cross the border and be resettled in a very rural, very red, gun-loving, immigrant-hating state of Idaho. The governor of Idaho is a conservative who won on election for his tough stance on immigration. Now that's put to the challenge. He publicly declares, in order to stay in power and popular, that he will ignore this federal law and not allow these immigrants into the state. He orders the National Guard to the border of a state to prevent these immigrants coming in. Now, because the president is liberal and on another side of the party, he can't appear to be weak to this conservative, or he'll lose power with his party. So now the liberal president has to respond to the conservative governor and up the ante, and immediately orders the airborne to move to the border of Idaho and bring the refugees in. Conservatives from other red states are alarmed by this federal action and its extreme behavior, and they send their own people to Idaho to support it. Eventually, it turns into militias of multiple states backing up Idaho, resisting federal overreach against federal troops. The movie ends largely with federal troops realizing that they must shoot fellow Americans and then turning on their federal military officers and killing them in cold blood. Again, I didn't think it was that funny. You can find it there. Now, what these two scenarios, almost 25 years apart, have in common is that they almost predict the exact same format for how a second Civil War would go. That's the key thing. There would be no armed militia that storms a federal installation like the South Carolina and Fort Sumter in 1860. Rather, a central government is of one political party than a particular state. That federal government orders immigrants or makes some sort of order that is directly against the values of that state. The governor of that state, who ran on those values and is in the opposition party, has to appear to be strong against the federal government, and so he or she ups the ante against him. The federal government, because it's the other party, now can't appear to be bullied by these governors, and it ups the ante. So the federal government says, we're going to do what we want. A particular state says, I don't like your party, and I don't like your values, and I'm not going to do what you say. Make me. And then the federal government says, okay, we will make you. And the moment they do that, it crosses that Rubicon, and then the governor becomes energized and goes to an even new, crazy new era or action or thing that we can't back down from. That's what they're both saying. I think that's relatively plausible for this reason. It's interesting that this format for both positions, one in 1997 and the other in 2021, have this same scenario because it matches a lot of things we've seen recently. So Greg Abbott is the governor of Texas, and he famously said that he would defy orders from liberal President Joseph Biden. He's a Republican. Gavin Newsom, a liberal, the governor of California, has famously said that he would defy orders from the Republican President Donald Trump. Greg Abbott, also the governor of Texas, ordered National Guard troops to meet and block federal troops during the operation of Jade Helm when the federal government ran a military invasion exercise there in Texas in 2015. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, famously said that California is a nation state and that it would control its borders with other states on the process of letting American citizens from other states in, and they would do it as California saw fit, not as the federal government did when they were talking about the reopening of COVID-19 early, I believe, in 2021 March. That's two states behaving exactly like these fictional scenarios postulated 24 years ago and last year. Governor saying, I'm not on your party, I will defy your orders. Governor saying, I will send the National Guard to stand up against the federal government. Governor saying, I determine how to treat American citizens in my government, and I don't care what the federal president says. And again, their opposition party. So a lot of the things they predicted in 2021 and in 1997, things like that have already happened. Think about that. Also, the idea that a standoff between the militia and the federal government could quickly turn bad with other states sending in militias also happened with the occupation of the Malmure National Wildlife Refuge in 2016. There was a group of militias who took over this wildlife refuge in Oregon or Washington. And then the federal government sent in troops and were trying to strong-arm them. The moment that pictures got out of that, militias and people from around America showed up. The federal government was overwhelmed, and basically those militias were able to occupy their resistance government for a couple months. Yes, let's read that. A militia stood up to the federal government, other militias joined them, and they actually got the mightiest military in the world to back down for a few months and do nothing. The American military only actually moved in with the federal government after some of those militias started to leave and they got bored and they took off. So for a while, they were able to push them back. Yes, that happened in 2016. Also, we had an attorney general in 2016, 2017, Jeff Sessions, say that a state can't secede. Now, in the movie, The Second Civil War, you have the American president exasperated going, a state can't secede. And in real life, we had the attorney general of the federal government yelling at a state that you can't secede. So the movie predicts high-level federal officials flabbergasted that a state's seceding and screaming about it, and then we actually had something like that happen. Again, none of this has happened before recently. You have not had states routinely saying, we will ignore federal law, we'll send our troops to meet your troops, we'll ignore your federal instructions for how to treat American citizens, militias coming together and able to stalwart the federal government for a while. That's all relatively new, last 5 years. And it was all predicted 24 years ago. And again in 2021. Now, what is interesting in many of these things from the movie 24 years ago is their depiction of politics in America is exactly the same. The conservative governor from Idaho runs on being against immigration and wants to, quote, return America to where it should be. That is exactly what Donald Trump said. He wanted to make America great again, and he ran against immigration. Many middle-class voters who appeared to be liberal actually agreed with this conservative leader because of his strong stance on immigration. There was a famous scene where he had a bunch of newscasters who appeared to be all liberal, and then half of them started arguing with the other half and going, well, how can we can let all these immigrants in when our infrastructure is so poor? Don't we have to take care of America first? El contrario es muy facabito. That was a quote they had. That's exactly what Donald Trump did. He came out as extreme, and what caught the media off was that a lot of Americans liked his message. They didn't like immigration. They liked his tough stance. They wanted to return to normal days as they saw them. And he won election. And this movie, 25 years ago, basically predicted someone winning office on the exact same ticket. And it relates now. That's impressive that things have not changed in 2 to 3 decades. Who knows how a second civil war would happen? We don't want it to happen, but it is interesting the parallels between just these two hypotheses of how it could happen, and that many of the crazed fictional scenarios proposed 24 years ago have actually come to happen. As Kim Iverson of The Hill said, quotes, I hope this doesn't happen, but these days anything is possible. We agree at Yes California.